For the last several Sundays, our first reading of the day from the Hebrew Scriptures has come from the book of Proverbs. In the Hebrew Scriptures there is a genre known as wisdom literature, and Proverbs is included. So somewhere in it there is to be found wisdom. Quite frankly, I'm pleased that we are now in the last reading from Proverbs, and it won't be read again for 9 years. We figured out the 3-year cycle of readings, it will be 9 years. It doesn't have anything really to say much about God. It's all about how to be successful in this life. It got into the Hebrew Scriptures because of the honorariness of a great Hebrew scholar centuries and centuries ago who held out for its inclusion while his peers were against it. He outsat them all. So we have Proverbs, sayings to get you through the day. Things like, the early bird gets the worm, that's in there somewhere, or raise your children right and they will be a credit to you in your older years. I kind of like instead the bumper sticker, it says, be nice to your children because they select your nursing home. The closing verses of Proverbs, which we read just a few minutes ago, has to do with the competent wife, the capable wife, as it is labeled, the capable wife. And it begins, a capable wife is far more precious than jewels. Guys, listen up. A capable wife is up before sunrise, works diligently all day supervising her home and servants, caring for her husband and children, and is the last to go to bed. The capable wife is an expert weaver and seamstress, creating the latest fashions which clothe her family and are sold in the marketplace, probably at a great increase in price. The capable wife is a gourmet cook, preparing exotic foods, an excellent planner who prepares for all manner of events. She can even anticipate the coming of a snowstorm and lay out proper clothes the night before. She is an astute real estate developer, buying land that she turns into a profitable vineyard. She is active in the community, cares for the poor and the destitute, frees her husband to sit on the town council and be one of the elders, and in her spare time she works out strengthening her upper arms. Her children call her happy, and her husband praises her all the day long. I don't know about you, but I don't think I'd rather be married to her. Those strong upper arms will give you pause. I am told that this portion of Proverbs is read in synagogues on Mother's Day and at the funeral of prominent women. And in one place I found that there is instructions given to new husbands to read this portion of Proverbs to his wife last thing on the day of the Sabbath. The capable wife. In contrast to the capable wife, there is the gospel for this morning, which is the story of the incapable disciples. Jesus and his disciples are on the road to Jerusalem. Peter has proclaimed Jesus as the Messiah when Jesus had asked, "Who do people say that I am?" And as Peter says, "You are the Messiah." and for that he gets soundly rebuked. The concept of the Messiah was a combination of a political and religious and spiritual leader who was going to save Israel from all of its enemies and make everyone wealthy. Jesus says to Peter, "Peter, shut up. Just be quiet." On this travel, then, he sets their face toward Jerusalem, the disciples thinking it's going to be something great for them, and Jesus seeing as it being a terror for him. They stop in Capernaum, use someone's house, settle in for the night. Jesus sits among the disciples and said, "Tell me, what were you arguing about on the road here?" What they were arguing about was who was going to have the best seats and the best seats of power in this new kingdom that Jesus was obviously going to usher in. They are embarrassed to tell him what they were really arguing about, but he knows. He's heard enough. The disciples want to be powerful and influential, and they want to be the greatest in the coming kingdom. Evidently, in the house where they're staying, it is owned by a family with a small child, and he takes the small child and sits him among the disciples and says, "Whoever wants to be first must be servant of all. Who wants to be the greatest must be like this infant." Who wants to be a servant? That is the goal he sets for his disciples. A friend of mine, Philip Morey, who is a former parishioner, he is a professor of business and is in the Graduate School of Business at Piedmont College in the Athens campus. He teaches a business ethics class, of which I teach part. I am there to talk about servant leadership. There are usually 12 to 20 students in the class. Most of them are older and work all day long. These are graduate students, not undergraduates. And I have learned the hard way, by making enough mistakes, of how to introduce servant leadership. I write 2 words on the chalkboard. On one side is the word leader, and on the other side is the word servant. And I ask them to tell me what comes to mind under each of those headings. What are the characteristics of a leader? And they usually come up with at least 12 to 15, all characteristics that every leader would love to have. But under the heading servant, there's usually no more than 6, and most of them are derogatory. In their minds, no one in that class is aspiring to be a servant. They all want to be leaders. No one wants to be a servant. And then I get to tell them the story of Robert Greenleaf. Robert Greenleaf, if you do not know, was in charge of management development for AT&T after the Second World War. He interviewed enough people for leadership positions in that organization and began to put together a concept. The fact that he worshiped on a regular basis had something to do with it, I believe. He looked for people who deep down, somewhere within, had some desire to serve in some capacity, or had some experience in serving. Maybe it had been in the military during the war years, who had been part of some sort of team. Maybe it was an athlete from high school or college years. Maybe it's somebody who had been an actor or an actress in a play, even back in high school. But he looked for some experience in that person's life where there had been team building, teamship. And that's how he introduced the concept of servant. Servants relate on teams. He built AT&T into one of the largest companies in the world. It still is. And his concepts have grown into an institute known as the Servant Leadership Institute. Some of you follow the Falcons, I'm sure. Dan Quinn is dedicated to servant leadership. He has even gone so far into talking Arthur Blank into laying out a lot of money to hire an organization made up of former SEALs. SEALs operate in SEAL teams. They live servant leadership, and the lives of every single one of them depends on the other people in their team. At least he's trying to instill that into a football team. Christian faith tells us every single week, in one form or another, that we live in community. And when this community acts together, when it seeks to do the right things, when it promotes justice and decries injustice, and it is living up to being that community of faith. Jesus told the disciples they could move mountains. In their faith, they could move mountains. I'm not sure about mountains, but I'll tell you about walls. On the morning of September the 4th, 1989, at St. Nicholas Church in Leipzig, Germany, East Germany, there was instituted a weekly prayer service, a prayer for peace. In East Germany, you lived in fear of the secret police. Wages were low. Travel was restricted. Ownership of most anything was uncommon. So at St. Nicholas Church, they ushered in a service to pray for peace, thinking that peace would bring the changes they wanted. They did it after the morning service. That first morning in October, there were several hundred people in the courtyard, and they prayed for peace. They prayed for various rights that they felt they were denied. And they would pray in that courtyard on Sunday mornings. First morning there were somewhere in the neighborhood of 200. The second week there were over 400. The third week there were 800, and they outgrew the space. So they moved to a park across the way from the church. And each week the crowd got larger and larger. Soon similar crowds began in a similar way at other churches. They formed Lutheran churches in other parts of Germany. And then on October the 16th, that was 6 weeks later. 6 weeks later, there were 120,000 in the square praying for peace, led by their religious leaders. They developed a chant. The chant was, "We are the people, God's people." On November the 9th, the Berlin Wall came down. And Jesus promised the disciples, "You can move mountains."